The Mortal Kombat franchise has a long and varied history when it comes to action figures. But in my opinion, nothing has compared to the Storm Collectibles run with the license. Since that has seemingly come to an end, at least for now, I wanted to take a look back at the line as a whole, plus name my top 10 figures from it. As Shang Tsung himself would say, let Mortal Kombat begin. At the beginning, Storm Collectibles made a big impact with their Scorpion and Sub-Zero figures, based on their iconic appearances from MK1 and 2. I had some awareness of Storm, due to their Hulk Hogan figures during his time away from WWE. At the time, I was familiar with high-end import brands like Mafex and Mezco, but my only experience had been with SH Figuarts' Mighty Morphin Power Rangers line. Unfortunately, I found them a bit too delicate for their price, which made me hesitant to explore other import brands. While I kept an eye on Storm's Mortal Kombat figures, I initially convinced myself that the Jazzwares versions were sufficient. That all changed when I saw the announcement for the Emperor himself, Shao Kahn. His incredible design caught my attention, and I knew I had to give it a try. Reptile was newly released and readily available, so I ordered him. Once he arrived, I was immediately hooked. Adding Shao Kahn to my collection became an instant no-brainer. Granted, the figures weren't exactly flawless. Early Storm figures tended to be riddled with quality control issues, most commonly loose pegs, especially in the wrists and neck. From there, I continued to add the color-swapped ninjas to my collection. Even with those occasional issues, though, I was glad to add each and every figure into my collection. Soon, more unique characters such as the Shokan General, Goro, and his brother, Kintaro, were both added into the mix. To me, this was where the line really started to fire on all cylinders. Even more so, when they started getting to the newer MK3 builds of various characters. Updated versions of Scorpion, Sub-Zero, and Reptile all hit the market fairly quickly. These new builds seemed to fix most of the quality control issues from the past. They were molded from better plastics and held together much more firmly. At the time, McFarlane Toys had just recently gotten a strong foothold onto the DC Multiverse franchise, and they scaled really well with Storm, so I was happy with the larger figures. As time went on, though, Storm divided their attention between additional franchises like Tekken, Soul Calibur, and more, which led to less frequent Mortal Kombat releases. However, Motaro and Sheeva were among those, and the final official release came in the form of Nightwolf. While the line was active, I was really hoping that we would eventually reach a completed version of the MK Trilogy roster. Mortal Kombat Trilogy is still my all-time favorite entry in the franchise, so these designs of the characters are how I tend to envision them when not viewing them in some other context. While roughly half of these characters have been released, I am a bit saddened that the other half will likely never see the light of day. If this is your first time visiting my channel, welcome to Civilian Collectibles. Hi, my name is Seville, and here I like to discuss my passion for action figures, as well as other collectibles, mostly inspired by my favorite movies, TV shows, video games, and wrestling. My ever-expanding collection features superheroes, sci-fi icons, and more, spanning a wide range of IPs, while most of my collection is based on live-action performers. I do occasionally sprinkle in characters from my favorite DC comic stories. If you're enjoying what you see so far, be sure to do all the things and come back for more. With my brief history now out of the way, it is officially time to get into counting down my top 10 Storm Collectibles Mortal Kombat figures of all time. Starting off at number 10, I have the champion himself, Liu Kang, based on his appearance in MK3. This is an absolutely great figure. Honestly, the only reason Liu Kang isn't ranked any higher was due to Storm's packaging choice. Liu Kang was packaged with his dragon animality figure. Don't get me wrong, the dragon is quite awesome, but in my opinion, it should have been a separate purchase. Maybe as an optional deluxe set, instead of being forced to purchase both at the same time, because that made Liu Kang be quite expensive compared to typical Storm releases. Otherwise, it's pretty much a perfect representation of Liu Kang. Coming in at number 9, I have the MK3 unmasked version of Sub-Zero. This is another figure that might have been ranked higher on the list if not for a single major flaw that I just couldn't ignore. In Sub-Zero's case, it is his skin tone. While modern interpretations of the character do tend to depict him as Asian, that was simply not the case during the era of the original arcade trilogy, with their use of sprites made from digitized actors playing the parts. Sub-Zero was played by John Turk, who was most definitely a white guy. Of course, for the modern versions of the more thoughtful stories for the characters, being of Asian descent does make plenty of sense. Storm's interpretation through this figure seemed to try to blend the two versions by making his skin tone appear darker than it should have been, and it just didn't work as well as I would have liked. Aside from that, this was an absolutely awesome figure, and overall still one I thoroughly enjoy seeing in my display. Moving on to number 8. I have the God of Thunder himself, Lord Raiden, based on his appearance in MK2. While playing around with editing effects, I found this lightning vortex animation and I thought it looked really cool for Raiden. Raiden is most definitely one of my favorite mainstay characters of Mortal Kombat, so he is definitely one I've always absolutely had to have in any of my collections, and Storm is no different. I just couldn't rank the figure any higher due to a few notable defects. Firstly, the black belt around his tunic broke immediately out of the package. The one you see now is actually from a neck and Ninja Turtles foot soldier. Secondly, the black paint under his chin and neck began chipping off pretty quickly after playing around with him for a bit. Sure, those are easy fixes, but it's something I shouldn't have to do, especially at Storm's price point. Otherwise, Raiden is a really fun figure that I love having pretty much front and center in most of my display setups. For number 7, I'm kind of cheating with a 3-for-1 option. Here I have all available Cyber Lin Kuei characters: Cyrax, Sector, and Smoke. All 3 of these figures are amazing, and were released fairly close to each other. The only complaint I have on them is for Sector. While this is not something that you would typically see right out of the package, the red on Sector's armor has faded greatly. I'm not sure what they did differently on Sector compared to the others, because neither Cyrax nor Smoke had that fading paint issue. For the most part, though, I think that Smoke is my overall favorite among the 3 figures. But basically, whichever of these characters is your favorite, that one can be plugged in here. Which Cyber Ninja do you like the best? Let me know in the comments. Finishing off the bottom 5, I have the original 4-armed Shokan himself, Goro. Releasing shortly after Shao Kahn, this figure is what solidified Storm Collectibles as the reigning champion for Mortal Kombat figures. The sheer size, design, colors, details, everything about this figure was just about perfect for its time. I just wish Goro was a little bit easier to keep standing upright. Other than that, I couldn't imagine any way to possibly improve upon what is in front of me. Goro has always been a fan favorite since the inception of the franchise itself, so I was glad to finally see a figure do him justice. Since this release, Storm did make another one, but instead based on his appearance in MKX. I never got that one myself, so I can't speak on which might actually be better when it just comes to overall quality. However, since this is based on his original appearance, this the Goro for me. For an honorable mention, I'm going to go with the original MK1 and 2 ninja characters, because this is where it all began. The success of these figures provided Storm with the ability to further expand the line. If not for the QC issues, they could have potentially been on the main list, but over time too many of them just had too many problems. With that said, let's move on to the top 5. With number 5 being the Outworld Emperor, Shao Kahn, as I said before. Seeing the initial announcement for this figure is what led me to make my first Storm purchase, and I was not disappointed. Kahn's massive build makes him a very imposing and threatening character who stands out, even when sitting in his throne. Anytime I'm doing pictures of a 1v1 fight, I like to keep Kahn sitting in the background as if it's in his arena. Much like Goro, there has been an updated version of Shao Kahn released, but because it was based on the newer incarnation, I never wanted to get it either, so I can't compare them for quality purposes. With this one being what's based on the original trilogy, it is the one for me. Coming in at number 4, I have the newest Shokan warrior, Sheeva. This figure made my overall top 10 list for last year, so of course it had to be here too. While I've heard that some people's Sheeva ended up having loose legs, making her difficult to keep standing, mine had no such issue. Sheeva is absolutely gorgeous and one of the best figures I've ever owned from any brand or franchise. Sadly, this is the only female figure that Storm managed to complete within the Mortal Kombat line, but it's a great one to hold that title. Getting into the top 3 now, I have the lone centaur named Motaro. As the MK3 sub-boss, Motaro stood out from the previous ones in design and fighting style. This figure is no different. The unique blend of horse and man stands out on any shelf, even among other Outworld monsters such as Shokans and Tarkatans. I remember seeing the original announcement and knowing it would be something I wanted immediately. Motaro did not disappoint and is one of my favorite figures, not just from Mortal Kombat, but from any of my collections period. If for some reason you've never picked Motaro up for your own collection, but have been considering it, I highly recommend doing so as soon as you get the chance. The same goes for my runner-up pick. Taking the number 2 spot is the tiger-striped Shokan, Kintaro. This figure is pretty much perfect. Remember how I mentioned that Goro had trouble standing upright? That was fixed by the time we got to Kintaro. I cannot find anything wrong with Kintaro at all. He is quite literally flawless. Highly detailed, beautifully painted, expertly crafted. In my opinion, Kintaro should be considered a crowning achievement for Storm Collectibles. The only reason he's not number 1 in this list is due to my personal attachment to the character in that slot. With that said, before number 1 is revealed, take a guess and tell me if you got it right in the comments. And finally, my number 1 spot goes to the ultimate Mortal Kombat 3 version of Scorpion. While the tunic on the upper torso is not quite 100% accurate to the game's design, it's the design that it represents that is important to me. The UMK3 version of the color palette swapped ninjas is still my favorite design to this day. As I said earlier, this look is the mental image I have any time I'm thinking of these characters, outside of any other context. And when the newer games include skins to revert back to it, I'll always utilize them. While Scorpion, more specifically, Hanzo Hasashi, it's still weird that I have to specify that now, is my favorite character in the Mortal Kombat games. The figures themselves are mostly the same across the spectrum, so much like the Cyber Ninjas. If you prefer Sub-Zero or Reptile, you can imagine that character taking this slot instead. I don't know about you guys, but back in my high school days, I thoroughly enjoyed hopping on Mortal Kombat Trilogy and playing a tower run-through with Scorpion, and seeing these figures always makes me nostalgic for those times in my life. So did you guess correctly? Did you know Scorpion would be my number 1 pick? Tell me your favorite characters in the comments as well. So there you have it, my top 10 Storm Collectibles Mortal Kombat figures of all time. While I am indeed saddened that the line is no longer in production, I am certainly glad to have gotten what we did up to this point. Mortal Kombat is what got me started with Storm, but it's not the only line I have collected over the years. I also have their DC Injustice figures, along with most of the Street Fighter 2 line, plus Tekken and Soul Calibur as well. While most of those also seem to have ended, Street Fighter is still going pretty strong, and I do intend to keep up with those as long as they're available. Thanks for all your support so far. It's really what keeps this channel going. Now, for a quick note before we finish up, I utilize an AI voice clone to help me deliver a clear and consistent experience, because of the speaking challenges that I face in my day-to-day life. Don't worry though, this really is my voice that you're hearing. While I absolutely do enjoy sharing my collection and enthusiasm with you all, it became clear to me that recording the speech needed to continue producing videos required more energy and focus than I was able to maintain, especially after an exhausting day as a sales professional. Due to speech impediments such as stuttering and dyslexia, the final product of my earlier videos only came after dozens and dozens of retakes, along with hours and hours of editing. Now that I can rely on my AI voice clone to handle much of that responsibility, I am able to provide a steady supply of engaging content for you, my valued audience. With all of that said, the last thing I want to do is give a quick shout out to the awesome people who helped make this channel possible. My Lionhead logo was created by Brian Leblanc Fantasy Art, and all of the music you have heard in this video was created by RJ Hughes. Check out their socials in the description to find more of their work. And if you want to see more from me, click on the next video you see on the screen now. I'll see you over there.